My name is Christian Ashley, a seminary student and servant of God, and you are listening to the Let Nothing Move You podcast, a proud Anazal Ministries podcast.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Let Nothing Move You podcast. I'm your host, Christian Ashley, as we continue on through the book of Exodus. Had a great 3-week stretch there with Nick Polk of Tolkien Pop joining me as we went through the plagues of Egypt. Now I'm alone again, and we're going to be in Exodus 13 and 14 today. We're going to be starting in verses 1 through 16. The Lord said to Moses, "Consecrate to me all the firstborn. Whatever is the first to open the womb among the people of Israel, both of man and of beast, is mine." Then Moses said to the people, "Remember this day in which you came out from Egypt, out of the house of slavery. For by a strong hand the Lord brought you out from this place. No leavened bread shall be eaten. Today in the month of Abib you are going out. And when the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, which he swore to your fathers to give you, a land flowing with milk and honey, you shall keep this service in this month. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and on the seventh day there shall be a feast to the Lord. Unleavened bread shall be eaten for 7 days. No leavened bread shall be seen with you, and no leaven shall be seen with you in all your territory. You shall tell your son on that day, 'It is because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt.' And it shall be to you as a sign in your hand and as a memorial between your eyes, that the law of the Lord may be in your mouth. For with a strong hand the Lord has brought you out of Egypt. You shall therefore keep this statute at its appointed time from year to year. When the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites, as he swore to you and your fathers, and shall give it to you, you shall set apart to the Lord all that first opens the womb. All the firstborn of your animals that are males shall be the Lord's. Every firstborn of a donkey you shall redeem with a lamb, or if you will not redeem it, you shall break its neck. Every firstborn of man among your sons you shall redeem. And when in time to come your son asks you, 'What does this mean?' you shall say to him, 'By a strong hand the Lord has brought us out of Egypt from the house of slavery. For when Pharaoh stubbornly refused to let us go, the Lord killed all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both the firstborn of man and the firstborn of animals. Therefore I sacrifice to the Lord all the males that first open the womb, but all the firstborn of my sons I redeem. It shall be as a mark on your hand or frontlets between your eyes, for by a strong hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt." God continues with his commands on a specific ceremony and ritual and holiday that the people of Israel are supposed to engage in. They are supposed to consecrate the firstborn, set them aside, set them apart, both man and animal, to showcase that they owe their lives to him, as he was the one who brought them out of Egypt and the one who allowed them to continue living. This didn't mean secondborn and beyond children were exempt from following God's commands or anything like that, but this was just a ceremonial ideal that was meant to raise questions and get people to follow the commands. Israel as a whole was God's firstborn son, and they needed to remember that if they knew what was good for them, they would follow these things. They would do these things. They would kill the firstborn of these animals rather than allowing one of their own children to have to suffer or something like that. And God would never be a God of human sacrifice, so he rejects that principle but allows an animal, an unworthier being, to cover the cost of people and their sins. Now, the Feast of Unleavened Bread was meant to bring the Israelites back to their own history and have them remember what had been done for them by God. They needed to maintain this calendar system created for them, to have this done every year, and was also done for the sake of their children, who would need to learn this system and then teach their own children, since the people who would remember their time in Egypt would one day die. And thus, this ritual holiday serves as that reminder. It's so easy to forget the things that came before us. It's so easy to forget. I'm doing this in light of the fact it was just Independence Day. And that is almost, let's see, it's about 250-ish years removed from our current state. So we have things written down. We have things of what the Revolutionary Army did and everything. But it's so far removed that it can be hard to remember the sacrifices done to at least create the country that we have now. It's not a perfect country. It's never going to be a perfect country. But if we forget our past, we're forgetting where we came from. And the same was true of the Israelites. They needed to remember this so their fathers would organize these events so that their children would ask, why are we doing this? So that one day when the children grew up to become the fathers of their own children, the same scenario would happen. But when we look at Israeli history, this has not happened. It fails multiple times over to be faithful to God and to follow with these commands. So that's precisely why God had this done, even knowing what they would do with his commands, and they would never follow it completely as he had asked them to, as he commanded them to do, I should say. He still wrote this anyway, so that when God's wrath was poured upon them, when God allowed other nations to conquer them, and they said, God, why would you allow this to happen? Well, because you didn't learn from your history. You didn't learn to serve me, the holy God who brought my firstborn out of Egypt so that I could make them my people and give them a land. You did not learn that lesson. And they didn't learn the lesson because they weren't faithful not only to God, but also to the commands God had given. So, yeah, we can look at this and go, well, they never actually did it. So, what can we actually learn from it? Why should I care? Well, we should care because was what was meant to be. And it was screwed up. It was messed up. People didn't do what they were supposed to do. So, we need to learn from that example. When God commands us to do other things and commands us to raise our children in his light, with his statutes, with his commands, maybe we should do that and actually mean it, because we see what happens when we don't. We'll continue from there to verses 17 through 22 and finish off the 13th chapter. When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. For God said, lest the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. But God led the people around by the way of the wilderness toward the Red Sea. And the people of Israel went up out of the land of Egypt equipped for battle. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for Joseph had made the sons of Israel solemnly swear, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones with you from here. And they moved on from Succoth and encamped at Etham on the edge of the wilderness. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them along the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, that they might travel by day and by night. The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night did not depart from before the people. Now, God's decision to avoid the Philistines comes as a result of his knowing the hearts of his people. He knows they are new to following him and they're going to falter if they see the might of the Philistines, even though God could easily wipe them out if he so chose to do so. But Israel is not in a position to fight a war yet. They are still learning how to rely on him. And by sending them to the easiest path, he's going to set them up for failure. And God's not about setting people up for failure. God is all about, hey, if you set yourself on that path and I told you not to go, yeah, sure, I'm going to let you fail. But God's not going to direct them to do that. They have just been freed from slavery, and their morale would falter substantially if they started fighting too soon. They are not a warrior people. They have been slaves for hundreds of years. They may have plundered the Egyptians, they may have taken some weapons along, but they don't have chariots. They don't have the fighting styles of the time. And in fact, that's going to be something that's not really going to be a thing for Israel for the most part until David becomes a king hundreds of years later, when they finally have like a stable army that is able to use natural resources to get an edge on everyone else, because the Philistines are going to control the iron trade around them. They're not prepared for this. So instead, God directs them to a different location, one where they will still be vulnerable to a larger army, but a location to where he will show them his power once more, and then remind them of who saves them. Now, like I mentioned earlier, if they had gone the way of the Philistines, this would have been the shortest route to the promised land. And the Philistines are going to be on the list of people that they needed to destroy and wipe out for their evil, remembering that God had given them hundreds of years to get their act right, by the way. But once again, this was too soon for the people of Israel to deal with. So instead, God led them along a longer path. And he often does that with us. We see the direction like, oh, well, I just need to walk here. I just need to talk to that person, and then things will be fine. And yet roadblocks come up, and suddenly phone calls aren't returned, or people are fired, or what have you. Relationships end. And you saw like, well, I was supposed to head this way. It was the shortest route. It was the best route. But God has a different thing in mind. Maybe by sending you that way, you wouldn't have learned the lessons you needed had God not sent you on this other route. It's not going to be pleasant more often than not. It's going to take more work, but you're going to be far more refined as a person, as a follower of God, if he sends you on the further route than if you go the way of the Philistine. Now, we also see here, Joseph had asked at the ending of Genesis 50 for Israel to return his bones to Canaan. This is just a little aside. I mean, this has no business being in here if this does not actually happen. It's just one of those things like you could have easily forgotten about this. But because it's an actual historical event, because it's something that actually happened, you mention it, you bring it up. And this was something that's took even longer to do because of the actions of the Israelites in that, hey, they know what the shortest amount of time it would have taken to get to Canaan? About 2 weeks from Egypt. About 2 weeks. Now, if you recall, my Bible scholars out there, how long did it take for Israel to actually enter Canaan? About 40 plus years. So why is that? Because while they were initially faithful to what Joseph had asked to do, they were not faithful to the God of Joseph and of them. But at the start, they were faithful in delivering Joseph's bones, and they will eventually do that far later on. Because Joseph knew that his true homeland was never Egypt, but it was Canaan, and that's where he would go even after his death. Now, we also see here, as a further show of his love and care for his people, God directly appeared in different forms for the entirety of the Exodus. And I mean the rest of the Pentateuch. He was a pillar of cloud by day that would direct their path, and a pillar of fire at night that served as light and protection for his people. And when he would make them move in the night, meant they knew where they were going. They could see in front of them. Now, as we continue on throughout the Pentateuch, remember this fact, because every single time something goes right or goes wrong, the people can literally look directly at God in these forms and be reminded that he loves them and dwells among them even when they deny him despite being right there. So when the people of Israel are grumbling about not having any food, guess what they can see in the middle of the day? They see that pillar of cloud, that pillar of smoke. Oh, guess what happens when they're upset? People could be surrounding us at night to attack us. There's a pillar of fire around that entire camp. When they're complaining about being led into the wilderness and not being given anything, when they're complaining about the fact that the spies have been sent into the land and they've given a disfavorable report, 10 of the 12, and said there are giants among them, and how could we possibly beat them? The pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire are there, and yet they still weren't faithful. So I say that not as a knock against the Jewish people, but kind of as a knock against you and I. Because so many times, and I think Nick and I had talked about this too. If I had been there, things would have been different. I would have had more faith. I never would have rebelled against God. Or would you? You wouldn't rebel? You're living out in the desert for 40 some years, and you're eating the exact same thing every day, and you're living in the heat, and you're sweating, and it's miserable, and the promised land's right there, but God's telling you to go this way. You're not going to get resentful of that pillar of cloud, that pillar of smoke that leads you away from the promised land for those 40 years. You're not going to look at that pillar of fire surrounding your camp that's supposed to be a sign of protection and saying, well, I'm actually a prisoner or something. That's not going to be your mindset, because I know that would be me at certain points in time. Yeah, I'm sure there'd be days I'd be really great, really faithful. But if I had to live that life, well, I'd be grumbling too. I'm a complainer by nature. It's what I do. So I think we get in this mindset of those poor idiots. They just don't have the full picture like we do. If I had been there, things would have been okay. Yeah, sure, that's 2020 hindsight talking. But we would have been, if not as bad as them, we might have been even worse. I kind of would put myself in a maybe even worse category at times. Maybe that's just self-deprecation at its worst. But remember, this whole time, every time they are attacked by a band of raiders like the Amalekites, every time that they succeed in a war, regardless of the good or evil that happens to them, God is there the entire time, physically And yet we, who cannot see the same thing, get even more upset when he doesn't do what we want him to, or when things are going our way and suddenly they're not. How can we do that? God deserves a lot better than what he gets. And I know, especially from me, but whatever he's sending to you, that's for you to figure out. But just remember, in the back of your head, I want you, as we continue on through the rest of the Pentateuch, when something goes well, when something goes bad, God is there physically as a pillar of smoke, a pillar of clouds, pillar of fire. And with that, we're going to continue on to chapter 14, going to verses 1 through 9. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell the people of Israel to turn back and encamp in front of Pi Hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, in front of Baal Zephon. You shall encamp facing it by the sea. For Pharaoh will say of the people of Israel, they are wandering in the land, the wilderness has shut them in. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them, and I will get glory over Pharaoh and all his host, and the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord." And they did so. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, the mind of Pharaoh and his servants was changed toward the people, and they said, "What is this we have done, that we have let Israel go from serving us?" So he made ready his chariot and took his army with him, and took 600 chosen chariots and all the other chariots of Egypt with officers all over them, over all of them. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued the people of Israel, while the people of Israel were going out defiantly. The Egyptians pursued them, all Pharaoh's horses and chariots, and his horsemen and his army, and overtook them and camped by the sea at Pi Hahiroth, in front of Baal Zephon. And it is here, people, that God has lured Pharaoh into his final trap. No doubt, while all this has been going on, Pharaoh has sent spies and scouts to watch the Jewish people as they're moving around Egypt. It's like getting reports back, well, they went this way instead of just going the way of the Philistine. They Now their backs are against the Red Sea. Like, this is the perfect opportunity. And when he noticed that they weren't immediately leaving Egypt and that their backs were literally against the wall of the sea, Pharaoh's pride would swell once again and make him think he stood a chance against the God who had directly proved that false multiple times over. Can you imagine the sheer amount of hubris it takes to make that decision? We covered all the plagues. We covered 10 of them. And Pharaoh was humiliated. Egypt was humiliated every single time. Even when they could replicate the plagues, they just made it worse for themselves. They couldn't remove the effects. And yet, somewhere in that heart that had asked for God to pray, for Moses to pray for him, Pharaoh thinks this is the moment. He's got it. God has given up. His people are wandering. I'm going to bring them back as slaves. Can you imagine the hubris it takes to say that after everything he's endured, everything he caused because of his own selfishness, because of his own pride and greed? And he thinks, nope, this time things are going to go differently. And then we look at ourselves. Now, I don't think any of us have suffered through 10 plagues, but we've suffered through loss. We've suffered through dealing with the repercussions of our decisions, knowing they were the wrong decisions to make, and yet we did them anyway because, well, I'm in charge. I say what I do in my life, and it blows up in our face, and we get angry at God. And it blows up in our face, and we say, well, God was causing me not to get what I deserved, so therefore I'm going to do it again, and it blows up in our face again. Or sometimes we get rewarded for doing the wrong thing, at least temporarily. And then we get angry when that's stripped away from us. Or we get angry when a minor inconvenience comes up. And suddenly it's God's fault instead of ours. Instead of God being merciful and not punishing us as we rightfully deserve, as fully as we deserve. Suddenly you make it, oh, it's all about me. And Pharaoh and us suffer from that same thing. The difference between those of you who are his is that there's repentance in our hearts, is that we will come back to him. It may take some time. Sometimes it takes years, but we will come back. He was never his, and he never will be. So let's learn not only from the examples of our own lives, the people's in our lives, but from people like Pharaoh, who would do such evil, heinous things and then act like it's not their fault. Act like God is the one punishing them for something that's out of their control. Now, if you look at a map of Egypt, and some of you may have them in your Bible, some may not, you may see they may do that thing where there's like a little circle, but nothing is inside of it. But for a city we know of, there'll be a black dot. And the circles would indicate, hey, we don't know exactly where this is. We just put a dot on the map. So if they're not filled in, that means we think this might be where it is, but we don't know. So we are very unsure, is the point of where some of these locations are, as they are simply lost to time. But they heavily suggest that Israel is resting on the side of the Red Sea, which is the opposite direction for a walking standpoint of where they need to go. Thus, in Pharaoh's mind, they have trapped themselves, as they will have no means of escape if he sends his armies to back them up against the sea. And we'll go from there to verses 10 through 18. When Pharaoh drew near, the people of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they feared greatly. And the people of Israel cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, "Is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us in bringing us out of Egypt? Is not this what we said to you in Egypt? Leave us alone that we may serve the Egyptians, for it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness." And Moses said to the people, "Fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent." The Lord said to Moses, "Why do you cry to me? Tell the people of Israel to go forward. Lift up your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it, that the people of Israel may go through the sea on dry ground. And I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they shall go in after them, and I will get glory over Pharaoh and all his host, his chariots, and his horsemen. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord when I have gotten glory over Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen." Just like Pharaoh had forgotten the power of God, so too did the Israelites. Now, granted, one was far worse than the other, yet God still stood by their side. The people of Israel, it would have been better if we had stayed in Egypt to serve the Egyptians. Are there no graves in Egypt that you've taken us away to die in the wilderness? Can you hear people in your life saying things like this? Can you hear Christians saying this about their pastors? Say, they're leading us into evil. They're leading us into darkness, when all they're doing is preaching the word. When all they're doing is, we're suffering from financial problems right now, or we may not know, if certain members are going to stay in the church or not, but they're being faithful, like Moses is being faithful, but the people aren't. Sometimes it's the people who are being faithful and the pastor isn't. Either scenario shows a lack of faith from certain members of that community. And here, while they are acting in anguish against God, it's not initially wrong to be upset. It's not initially wrong to have a worry, but they turn that worry into fear, and they turn that fear into anger, and the anger will lead to suffering, as good old wise Master Yoda said. And they can't afford that right now. They need to be better. God knows they're not going to be better, at least right now. And God expects perfection from his servants, yet also knows his servants are imperfect people and will sin against him, just like Israel's doing right now, just like I will do maybe even later today. I ain't perfect. I ain't going to be, but I'm working on it. The Israelite people will push him to the brink of annihilating them multiple times over, but he will always relent and forgive, even when they don't deserve it. He will always relent and forgive me and you when you and I don't deserve it. Their faith is small and weak, but God is going to work things to help increase that faith with what he does in this chapter. And he will do the same for you and I. When I get tunnel vision and I forget about every single good thing God has done for me, and I say, woe is me, God's not on my side, I can't figure things out, I don't understand. He's still there. I'm just not looking. He's still providing. I'm still alive. I still have friends and family. I still have enough finances to get things going. Is it perfect? No, but he's still there, and he provided those things. But when I narrow my vision, and I selectively sometimes narrow my vision, I don't see the good he's done. I forget about the times when, man, I don't know if I'm going to be able to afford to pay my bills this month. And yet something comes along. Someone sent some money, said, hey, I don't know why. And this has happened multiple times to me, but God put you on my heart. Here's some cash. And I was able to do it. I had not asked anyone. I hadn't even bothered to pray. That's how bad I was at times. That's how bad I can be. And yet he still looked after me. But I forget those things happen. We forget about those things happening because suddenly our backs are up against the wall. And by the way, we went that way. God told us to go that way too. And yet we think he's leading us into evil. Well, everything he's doing is for our own good. That's who he is. And God will help increase our faith. We just have to ask him. We just have to work with him. We have to trust him. Then we go to Moses. Moses speaks against their fear, rightly so. And God then speaks through him, using Moses as the conduit that will unleash his power upon the world. He's not doing this for Moses' glory, but for his own, so that no one can deny who saved the people of Israel and destroyed the armies of Pharaoh. It's not Moses' power that's doing this. It's certainly not the faith of the Israelites. It's God acting even when people are faithless and troubled and doubting for their own benefit. And we're going to see exactly how that happens if somehow you've never heard the story before by finishing off this chapter with verses 19 through 31. Then the angel of God who was going before the host of Israel moved and went behind them. And the pillar of cloud moved from before them and stood behind them, coming from between the host of Egypt and the host of Israel. And there was the cloud and the darkness, and it lit up the night without one coming near the other all night. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord drove the sea back by a strong east wind all night and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. And the people of Israel went into the midst of the sea on dry ground, the waters being a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. The Egyptians pursued and went in after them into the midst of the sea, all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. And in the morning watch, the Lord in the pillar of fire and of cloud looked down on the Egyptian forces and threw the Egyptian forces into a panic, clogging their chariot wheels so that they drove heavily. And the Egyptians said, let us flee from before Israel, for the Lord fights for them and against the Egyptians. Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea, that the water may come back upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots, and upon their horsemen. So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its normal course when the morning appeared. And as the Egyptians fled into it, the Lord threw the Egyptians into the midst of the sea. The waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen of all the host of Pharaoh that had followed them into the sea. Not one of them remained. But the people of Israel walked on dry ground through the sea, the waters being a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Israel saw the great power that the Lord had used against the Egyptians, so the people feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord and in his servant Moses. Now, there, of course, has been much debate on whether this miracle actually happened or not. In some circles, this is merely mythology. In others, it's more mundane, and that the people of Israel passed not through the Red Sea, but the Sea of Reeds, which comes with a myriad of possible explanations we'll get to in a bit. And yet still in others, this happened exactly as it says it does. I, to no one's surprise, am in the latter camp. To the first, I will politely say I find this idea false and lacking in respect to the word being true. And there are plenty of people I know who believe this, and they are otherwise great servants of God, but I feel this denies his power and truthfulness through his scriptures and misses the point of why these were written in the first place. These are not written as a just so story. If you don't know what that means, there's a Rudyard Kipling, kind of his idea is like, oh, well, why does the elephant have a long trunk, or a giraffe or long neck, or for Aesop's fables, why are bats neither part of the birds or part of the animals or mammals in that sense, even though we would classify them as mammals, they didn't back in the day. This would be a just so story of, well, how did Israel get into Canaan? Well, we were in slavery in Egypt, and then God saved us, and then we got into Canaan. Okay? If you're just using it as mythology, that's kind of wacky. You're also telling me to trust this God that you say didn't do the things that he did in that story. You're telling me I shouldn't. Why should I believe anything else he has to say if this is based on a lie? if this is just mythology? Like, how can I know God is truthful to me? Why would he make all these things about, unleavened bread festivals and Passover and, loving my neighbor as myself, as we'll learn along the way? Why should I listen to those things if you're lying about certain things like this? If you're saying, well, that's just how we figured out how he got here, that's our best guess, that means nothing to me. That's a God I can't put my faith and trust in. But I know the people, that's perfectly fine for them. I don't get it. I never will. But hey, I will even dare to say the opinion of, if they believe in that God, believe in the same God I do, but they can't get behind this and yet they still serve him, I'm going to have arguments with them all day about their interpretation of scripture. But at least they're doing what he's saying, other things that he said to do. Because there are plenty of people on my side of things who would espouse these beliefs of this being literally true, and yet you've never once seen fruit in their lives. So if they can be screwed up on my side, I think that they can be good on the other side. Now, there are definitely some things I'm going to be like, no, this ain't happening, but I understand where some of them are coming from. I disagree utterly and completely, but I understand. Now, the second interpretation here, I also see their points, as the actual terminology here used is yam suf in the original Hebrew. That's their words for sea and reeds. Now, this could refer to a swampy area filled with reeds, or to a lake like Lake Timsah or the Lake of Tanis. But ultimately, I think these ideas fall flat because the Israelites would have been able to not get surrounded in these scenarios, and swampy areas would have been perfect for evading chariots. All they would have had to do is walk through it. There would have been no miracle. There would have been none of this, oh, why did you send us out here to die? All they have to do is just walk away, because chariots infamously aren't going to be good in the swamp. It's fine. But I believe this whole scenario is revolving around the Red Sea, because it is far more miraculous for them to be delivered in this scenario. If they have the Red Sea to their backs, they are doomed without the intervention of God. There is no point of escape, and they have no forces capable of fighting one of the greatest armies in the ancient world. But that's the point. Only God could have delivered them from this situation, and he does. Even if it's not the Red Sea, even if it was a swampy area, even if it was like the Lake of Tanis, and they just crossed a lake instead of an entire ocean, it's still miraculous either way, because no human power is capable of saving Israel, and God proves that with his actions. The point is, there is a miracle occurring here, something supernatural, something beyond human comprehension. And God delivers them not in a mundane way, because he is actively using his power on the world that he created. He is not standing by like some deist wet fantasy and just saying, well, good luck, Israel. You're my people and all, but I have nothing better to do. I don't have the power to do what I say I can do. No, he is using the power of the all sufficient, almighty God to say, these are my people. I'm going to put them in a scenario where they have to rely on me. No deed of man is capable of saving them, only my power, so that the glory comes to me, not man. And God calls Moses not to prayer at the beginning, but to action. There are times to pray for his answer and a time to do what he says, and God directs Moses to save his people in a way impossible for them to deny. Prayer is great. Prayer is something I need to be far better about doing. But there's a time to pray, and there's a time to actually get something done. And this is a time for action. God is going to deliver his people by action, not by thoughts and prayers, not by any of that, but by action. The waters split, and Israel is allowed to walk without hindrance, while the Egyptians are stalled by the pillar of cloud and then by their chariots suffering from rough terrain that, surprisingly, the Israelites themselves didn't experience, almost as if they were supernaturally being protected. This gives Israel enough time to cross for the Egyptians to realize their folly, but not enough time to survive God's wrath. With these actions, God has once and for all proven they have nothing to bring against them, and Egypt is humbled once more, and his people are safe. Nothing can stop him. Nothing stops God from what he wants to get done, because God is not feeble. He is not weak. He is not unable to act in this world. He does so and did so and will continue to do so, not only for the Jewish people, but for you and I as his followers. To those of us who have repented of who we used to be, for those of us who have moved beyond, seek to be a new man, a new woman, that same power is there for us. And a miracle is a miracle, regardless of how small it is. So thank you guys for once again hanging out with me here and Let Nothing Move You. Please get a chance to leave a 5-star review on your podcasting platform of choice to help us with the ratings there. If you're interested in my own fiction writing, you can find my works at starvingwritersguild.com or on Amazon by searching for the name MC Ashley. If you're all interested in some further solid studies into the Bible and its teachings, then check out the other members of the NSL Ministries podcasting network. You can contact me at letnothingmoviepodcast@gmail.com. I'd like to extend a special thank you to Joshua Knoll for the editing that he does and for the music he has to the podcast. And with all that in mind, God bless you all in accordance to his will and not mine. And allow me one more time to remind you, let nothing move you.
Hey guys, are you interested in podcasting but don't know where to go? Well, check out Zencaster.com and go ahead and make an account there and use special promo code Let Nothing Move You, all caps. That way you can get 30% off of your next deal to go ahead and set things up so you can figure out how to edit stuff using Zencaster.com to host your stuff, to get things done there. So check out Zencaster.com, use special promo code Let Nothing Move You. All right, see ya.